All right, so as promised, we need to dig into the specifics of this biological perspective. And we're going to start at the micro level, everyone. Parts of the central nervous system, the brain and the spine are part of the central nervous system, and they are made up of these cells called neurons. So I'll put a recording chunk or two or three. We'll see how long this takes. Remember, I suggest you don't try to go through all this in one sitting. Try to chunk these videos out throughout the week and make them meaningful. See what questions you have, just like we've talked about before. So, as we go through this presentation about neurons, we need to make sure we can understand the parts of a neuron to describe those, to identify the specific parts of these cells, explain how the neurons work, how they do their job, explain how neurons communicate with one another. Let's start with that. Maybe your first big note of this presentation. These things called neurons are cells, like other cells maybe you've learned about in biology class, but these particular cells are messengers. Okay, a neuron is a messenger cell. The main job, really the only job of a neuron, is to send and receive messages to and from other neurons, other parts of the body. So you have other, your limbs, your skin can send information into your brain, telling you, what you feel, temperature, pressure, whatever. Your eyes, certainly, if they're working properly, send messages to your brain telling you what you see. Well, those messages, whether they come from the skin, the eyes, nose, ears, whatever, those sensory signals are eventually picked up by neurons in the brain. If you stub your toe, that pain message is picked up eventually by neurons in the spine that carry that signal up to the brain, where other neurons pick up that signal, interpret it for us, and make us feel that pain. But neurons also send information out, right? If you can wiggle your fingers or scratch your face or wiggle your eyebrows or whatever. That was creepy. Sorry. Neurons started that process for me to speak words. Neurons start that process. There's a chain reaction that happens from the brain to my lips and vocal cords, allowing me to speak. And of course, just after, you've got neurons picking up those auditory signals and helping you interpret what I'm saying. So we will eventually get to the macro aspect of how the brain works and what different brain parts specialize in. But let's remember, this is the micro level. Everything the brain does happens at the neuronal level. There are individual neurons jam packed throughout your brain, connected to one another in networks. No one neuron can work all by itself. You'll see another objective we have here is understanding how different drugs affect what neurons are doing. We'll get to that too, but I wanted you to see this picture just to get an idea. This is a view from an electron microscope, I think, that reinforces this idea that no single neuron can act by itself. Every one is important, every single neuron is, but like here's in the foreground, here's the cell body of a neuron. It's got these extensions, these sort of arms reaching out, connecting to other neurons. And this thicker extension here is kind of a tail, we'll learn about. The tail of a neuron also reaching out, extending to other cells, other body parts to do its job. So you can imagine this one neuron could have extensions that lead out connecting to dozens or hundreds, maybe even thousands of other neurons, creating networks. This one neuron, where's my cursor? This one neuron, if it fires, and in class I've made this stupid sound, right? That's my cheesy dad sound for what a neuron sounds like in my head when it does its job. It's whatever. But this one neuron sends its signal down this axon, as we'll learn in a second. That one signal could be picked up by dozens or hundreds or thousands of other neurons that in turn, each one of those neurons sends their message to other neurons, brain parts, body parts, what have you. So you can imagine if this one neuron gets damaged through a concussion or Alzheimer's disease, where a plaque would build up on the parts of this neuron, even one neuron getting damaged could in turn have drastic effects on major parts of the brain, because any one neuron is part of a bigger, very important network of neurons. Okay, so it comes down to this. We need to know the specific parts of a neuron. Here's a diagram of, this is a motor neuron. So this type of neuron, when it does its job, it would help us move or speak, something like that. More on motor neurons later, but all neurons have the same basic parts, even though different neurons could look specifically different. All neurons have a cell body, like we see here. And in the cell body, we've got a nucleus, just like other cells you've learned about. This is the control center of the neuron. Everything the neuron does, everything the neuron has, all these extensions and other parts are very much controlled by the nucleus. The DNA of the cell is in the nucleus. It's the control center. These are the dendrites. These sections out here that look like tree branches, that's actually where the dendrites get their name, because I think dendra, at least the prefix dendra, comes from Latin or Greek for tree. If you're dendrophobic, you can guess what that means. You're immensely afraid of trees. Dendrophiliac would be just the opposite. We won't talk about that. But anyway, these tree branch looking arms are extending from the cell body. They're the dendrites of the neuron. Now you need to know the job of the dendrites is to receive messages from other neurons. So this one neuron, look at all the dendrites that extend out here. You could imagine every one of these dendrites could have multiple other neurons hooked up to them. And we'll talk about how and what that means in just a minute. But recap, a neuron is a messenger. This whole cell is a messenger. It's going to send messages to other neurons and body parts, and a neuron is going to receive messages from other neurons and body parts. The dendrites are the receivers. These are the receiving end of the neuron. Okay, this is all going to make more sense as we go. Let's go on to the axon. Now, we can't see the axon very well because it's kind of covered up by these sausage-looking things, but the axon is kind of a purple tail that extends all the way down here. Here we can see the end of the axon. The axon is the tail of the neuron. It extends from the cell body. And for now, let's know that the axon is the sender of the cell. The dendrites receive messages. The axon is going to send messages. Again, that's going to make sense more in just a minute. The axon is the sender. Now, this axon is covered by a myelin sheath. The word sheath just means cover or coating. Not all neurons have this myelin coating, but this one does. You'll see why this is important in a little while. The myelin sheath, if it's there at all, it covers the axon. It's very important. We'll see why in a minute. At the end of the axon, we see that the axon branches out. These are called the axon terminal branches. Okay, axon terminal branches are going to reach out and hook up to, likely, other neurons. So if we were in class, I could demonstrate this better, but imagine there's a whole nother drawing of this neuron over here on this side. Okay, so you're imagining, look at my cursor over here to the right, imagine a whole other cell body over here with dendrites extending out, and some of these dendrites are going to hook up to these axon terminal branches. Because remember, the axon is the sender of the neuron, and the dendrite is the receiver. So if this neuron fires down the axon, it's going to send messages to other neurons whose dendrites are hooked up over here on this end. Okay? At the end of the axon terminal branches are these little nubs, these buttons or knobs. They're called axon terminal buttons or terminal knobs. Different books call it different things. I've even seen a French version, axon terminal bouton. I think if you say it that way, you have to add a hon at the end, but you're not getting away from the dad jokes, even in these stupid recordings. Anyway, in the axon terminal buttons, this part's really important, and you're going to see this in a little while, but for now, let me tell you, inside the terminal buttons are neurotransmitters. You'll see that word in a little bit, neurotransmitters. Now, neurotransmitters are chemicals. Let's put it this way. The neuron is the messenger. Okay, let's think of the neuron, this whole cell, as being like a mail delivery person. Okay, this is the mailman. The neurotransmitters, which we can't see yet, they're in these little buttons. The neurotransmitters are the mail. They're the messages that one neuron will send to another. Okay, the neurotransmitters are contained inside the axon terminal bouton. Stupid buttons, axon terminal buttons. Okay, so know these parts. All right, I got to do it. Let me stop sharing. I'll go full screen here. I'll adjust my laptop. This might be stupid, but I would do it if we were in class together. So I'll try it here. Maybe it'll help to imagine a neuron model being on your own body. You could do like this. I know you can't see my arm out here extending, but I've got this arm extending out here with my fingers extended. This, if you need it, this could just be a way to remember the neuron parts. You've got this hand against your body representing the cell body. This is where your nucleus would lie, kind of like your heart, even though that's not where all your DNA is. But anyway, your cell body has dendrites that extend off of it. I know this is cheesy, just bear with me, okay? The dendrites extend off a cell body. This would be the receiving part of the neuron, okay? So if you had other people around you doing this same thing, they would take their axon terminal branches and maybe link their pinky, extend it out here, up to one of your dendrites, okay? And if that happens, I'm going to do it myself. This would never happen with a neuron. A neuron would never feed back on itself like this. But if somebody in your house wants to help you learn about neurons and you have them do this stupid body model with you, have them take one of their axon fingers and link it up with one of your dendrite fingers. Leave a little space because these don't actually connect. That would be creating a synapse, folks. That would be a synapse where an axon of one neuron hooks up to a dendrite of another. That would be a synapse. We'll see that in a minute too. Okay, so let me go back. We're making a neuron model out of our body. Okay, got a cell body with dendrites coming off. My extended arm here would be an axon. Okay, this is an axon. At the end of the axon are terminal branches. Okay, so again, if you have somebody at home there who's got their dendrites sticking out, you can take your axon terminal branches and reach out to their dendrites. And of course, on the end of your axon terminal branches, you've got fingertips. These would be like your terminal buttons where the neurotransmitters live. Okay, so you have to imagine those neurotransmitters would spit out of your fingertips onto receiving dendrites. We'll see that in a little while. So anyway, here you go. You're a neuron. And just because I would do this if you were in class, and we all need as much entertainment as we can get, especially watching these video chunks, here's a song that will embarrass me and hopefully help you learn this. You ready? My son's over there playing video games. Don't listen to me over there. I don't want you to think even less of your dad. Okay, ready? By the way, cell body is also called a soma. Soma, cell body. You'll need to know that. I'm a little neuron, I'm no Lona. Here are my dendrites, here is my soma. When my threshold's met, there is no doubt. To my terminal buttons, my signal goes zonk. Dumb. but if it helps you learn it, it's all worthwhile. Okay, so let's go back to my presentation. Hopefully you're done rolling your eyes or vomiting or laughing or whatever you're doing in response to that song. Next, ready? Make sure we know these parts. Here's what's next. Okay, so I use the paint function here to try to cover the myelin sheath to make it look like this neuron was no longer myelinated. So imagine the myelin sheath is not there. This is, if I move my box there you go. This is supposed to represent the same neuron we just saw, but without its myelin coating. Excuse me. So this is an unmyelinated axon. And we've been talking about neurons sending signals, right? Bazonk and all that stuff. I wanted to give you an idea of why the myelin sheath is important in that function. So this represents electricity. These neurons do their job with electricity. I added the sound function. Can you hear that? But that's super annoying. That's just reminding you that the neurons use electricity to do their job. And when a neuron fires, when the axon sends its signal, it's going to go something like this. Watch. That electric spark travels the length of the axon, goes down the terminal branches, and no, the myelin sheath doesn't magically appear. We saw the spark one more time. It goes a lot faster than this in real life. Ready? Bizonk. That's electricity following or flowing down the length of the axon. Now let's watch what happens when that same neuron has its myelin coating. Okay, the myelin sheath is here. Watch what happens when the same neuron fires now. Ready? Bizonk. See that? One more time. This electric spark is going to travel down the axon, but watch how it does it. Here's the last time we saw it. Ready? It went kind of slowly down the axon. Now, this neuron has its myelin coating. The spark travels a lot faster. One more time. There you go. I wanted that noise to stop. Hopefully you can still hear me. The idea is the myelin sheath that can grow on neurons. So, okay, let me back up for a second. Most of our neurons in our brain when we're first born are unmyelinated. But over time and with usage, neurons become myelinated. And look at what that does. The myelin coating we just saw speeds up the neural transmission. It speeds up that electric spark that flies down the axon like that. If you noticed, I'll play it one more time in a second, that spark kind of leapfrogs down the axon when the myelin sheath is there. There's these little gaps beneath between the sausage links, if you will. These are called the nodes of Ranvier, just FYI. But sorry, might be a French name. So dumb. The myelin coating builds up over the axon with usage, with practice. And what that does, it makes the neuron fire its signal faster, more efficiently. We'll see it again. Jeez, I don't know why I put these sound effects in. Here we go. Unmyelinated axon. Ready? Bizonk. Impressive, certainly. Myelinated axon. Bizonk. Leapfrog. See the leapfrog? Boom, 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 boom. So again, the axon is still shooting its spark down its length, but the myelin sheath helps that firing get to the end of the line faster. Now that means that you and I behaviorally start doing things better. The first couple times you try to ride a bike, you're terrible at it. It's awful. You have to try really hard and try to get your balance. But the more you ride that bike, just to use that cliche example, the more you're using certain neurons in your brain that are helping you ride that bike. Well, the more you use those neurons, the more those particular neurons become myelinated over time with more practice. And as those particular neurons get myelinated, you, not coincidentally, get better at riding your bike. Your behavior changes, you get better, your balance, your coordination improves because you're basically exercising these neurons and they're adapting to their usage. Just really quickly, imagine what that means for everything we do, especially throughout childhood. And this is why we haven't done a ton with developmental psychology until we got to this brain stuff. Because my goodness, thinking, reading, problem solving, walking, feeding yourself, anything, learning to talk, learning different languages. Man, the more a child has these neurons stimulated in their brains, the more those neurons will adapt and become myelinated and get better at doing their job, helping that kid, and we're talking about kids, of course, in this case, helping that kid do the thing they're doing better, learning languages, juggling, balancing gymnastics, typing, reading, whatever. This is neurologically the reason why good child care, is so important, because brains are adaptive. Brains don't just send messages out to our body parts telling us to do things. Brains are also, neurons are responsive to what's happening to them. So if we stick a kid in a cupboard, Harry Potter style, and he's neglected, he's not going to live up to his potential. This is part of the reason. Go back to genetics for a second and intelligence. This is part of the reason why it's ridiculous to think that a person's intelligence is completely genetic. No, genes can give us the basis for our intelligence. Genes can set up our potential. But if we neglect a kid who's got the potential to be a genius, if that kid is, left by himself, not stimulated, not taught to think, not, having experiences that we all take for granted, if that kid's brain isn't stimulated, his brain is not going to respond with this myelin growth, among other things, and that kid's intellectual potential will never be realized. Okay? Genes give us our potential, our foundation, but experience builds on that foundation. Okay? And, behaviorists have been saying that all along, of course, that we learn from our environment, that our learning shapes us. But this is showing us a biological aspect of that. Our neurons are adaptable. Okay? So what they experience through childhood, very, very important. Okay. We're going to get into the synapse here for a second, but really quickly. I'm going to stop this recording in just a minute, but before I do, another quick kind of point about the importance of myelin. Let's see if I can explain this quickly. There's a disorder called multiple sclerosis, MS. Just another idea on how important myelin coding is. MS, multiple sclerosis, is a disease where a person in adulthood typically starts to lose their myelin coding. Now think about everything we've just discussed. These neurons are, when they're myelinated, when they become myelinated, it's because the neuron is getting better at doing its job. It's firing its signals faster than it ever used to. So now imagine a person with this autoimmune disease, this multiple sclerosis. To put it simply, a person with MS, their immune system attacks the myelin coding on the neurons in their brain and spine. So the myelin starts to get eaten away. It starts to disintegrate. Well, what's that mean for the person? Again, keeping this simple, but it could mean that they could have some very severe physical symptoms. I know a person with MS who described first realizing their symptoms. They would sometimes get tingly feelings in their, extremities and their limbs, their fingers and toes and things. But there was this one time they talked about getting up to go get a drink from the refrigerator. They were in their living room watching TV. They go to stand up to walk to the fridge to get a drink, and they just hit the floor. They just fell over, and they couldn't explain why. They knew what they were doing. They didn't think they tripped on anything. But to put it simply, like, things like this kept happening. They'd reach for their drink and like knock it over, not be able to control their movements all that well. Well, they eventually got concerned enough. They went to a doctor. And again, to put it simply, what they were told was, because of multiple sclerosis, because of what was diagnosed, this person was able to have a thought that they wanted to stand up, walk to the fridge to get a drink. Again, to put it simply, that thought turned into neurotransmission that had to leave that person's brain, travel down their spine, and go to their leg muscles to help them stand up and actually walk to go to the fridge. Say it again, to put it simply, because their myelin sheath was being disintegrated, deteriorated, the signals from the brain were not making it to the leg muscles in time for the movement to happen fluidly. So the person had the thought, let's get up and go get a drink. And the legs were like, we ain't heard nothing. We're chilling. What's up? And we haven't gotten that signal yet. You know what I mean? Again, it's putting it simply, and I hope that's not disrespectful to any sufferers from MS, but it just goes to show how much we take this for granted and how important it is, this myelin sheath speeding up the neural firing, the neural transmission that happens with a neuron. It is super important, and it affects everything we do. And if we start to lose that myelin coating, it would affect us in ways that we can't even imagine. By the way, a person with MS has this disease is, the word is slipping me right now. I can't talk all of a sudden myself. Degenerative, that's the word, sorry. MS is a degenerative disease. That means it gets worse over time. It can be slowed with treatments, with medication, but it's degenerative. That means this myelin coating will continue to wear down over time. And in the worst cases, over time, the myelin coating can even wear off of the neurons that send messages to a person's heart and their lungs. And you can imagine, if the heart's not getting its messages in time, telling it to beat, if the lungs aren't getting its messages in time, telling them to breathe, this could cause very serious problems, to put it lightly. Okay, I'm going to stop that recording. And next we're going to look at the synapse. What's happening at the point where neurons connect, where neurotransmission can happen. Okay, see you there.